All right. All right. Hi. Welcome, everybody, to the Shelburne Planning Commission on February 27th. Just remind everybody that to make sure that you're in the sign-in sheet so the minutes can be accurate. And when we get to it, might make another reminder. But in case I forget, just make sure to, if you come to the mic to say something, just make sure you state your name. And also helpful to know generally where you are. So first item is approval of the agenda. And take a motion to approve.
So moved.
Moved by Steve.
Second.
Seconded by Steven. Huh? Yeah, I haven't. Yeah, I wasn't all in favor yet. For discussion before we agree on it, I wanted to ask if it'd be okay to insert. We have an appointment to the housing subcommittee that I think can be done outside of a meeting, but it's just easy enough to do it formally. Sure. So I figured we could do that between or just right after disclosures before open to the public. That's okay.
Move as amended.
All right, so all in favor as amended?
Aye.
Okay. So now approval of the minutes from February 13th. The Planning Commission meetings are pretty straightforward.
Right. Are we doing both of them? Do we move them separately, or do you want to?
Do we move them separately?
It is something that you could consider waiting until you do convene as the
That's a better idea.
because the law required them to be posted, so they were out there.
Yeah.
I felt like everybody should have them, but it would really be up to you. It wasn't warned tonight as the TRB.
Because TRB should stay with TRB stuff.
Okay.
Yeah, okay. So motion to approve the February 13th minutes.
I move. Second.
Moved by Steven, seconded by Steve. Any discussion?
Those are pretty straightforward.
Yeah. Okay, well, all in favor? Aye. Okay, and we will postpone the review of the TRB minutes from the 13th until the TRB reconvenes on 3/26. And, okay, any disclosures relating to any conflicts of interest this evening? Seeing none. Then, as amended, this is mostly a statement. I would like to formally appoint Julie Gaborio to the Housing Subcommittee. I think it's just more of a statement.
Great, thank you. Okay.
So, all right. Welcome, Julie. It's official. All right. Okay. So now, open to the public. Are there any comments from anybody wanting to talk about a topic not on the agenda tonight? Yes, sir.
My name is Sean Moran. I am the president of Lakeview Co-op Incorporated. So this is not on the topic on the agenda as I see, unless it's collateral in the zoning laws. But it's not about the zoning. It is about the build that Champlain Housing Trust has proposed.
Yes, and I think that's all under the topic of the issues of concern. It's around that concept.
Around the zoning?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. All good? Okay. And we're going to jump into that right now. So, and actually, before questions, Dean has a set of slides just to review to give us some context so we can go through that, and that'll get us aligned a little bit before we jump into questions.
Hopefully everyone can see these. Since not everyone here tonight has attended Planning Commission meetings regularly and has an understanding of what it is that the Planning Commission does and how it is involved in the process of changing regulations, I thought I would just spend a couple of minutes going through that. This is a slide presentation based on some work that others. Just wanted to start by saying there is a law, or there are laws on the books in Vermont that determine what it is that the Planning Commission does. They go back to the 30s. What's more important to know is that there were some major amendments in 1988 and 2004. In 1988 was the time when the law was changed that said towns don't have to have plans, comprehensive plans, but if they do have plans, those plans need to have sections having to do with housing. It was also the time when there were some statewide goals established, including one of the goals that basically encourages a diversity of housing. Originally, there were something like 35 goals, and they've been pared down over time. But I also wanted to mention that in 2004, there was an amendment to the law that significantly updated the system for planning and zoning in Vermont with several pieces that had to do with housing, and I'll talk about those in a second. But before I do that, I just wanted to spend a moment to talk about what is a municipal plan and why would a town want to have one. A plan is what some people will call a blueprint for development or growth and conservation. It's intended to reflect the desires of the community and where they want to go, where they want that community to go. Why would a community want to have a comprehensive plan? Well, it helps establish some agreement on the direction that the town should go in. But it also is significant in that a town must have a comprehensive plan if it's going to have any kind of regulations like zoning and subdivision. In the past, comprehensive plans were updated every 5 years, but there's been a change, so now it's on an 8-year schedule. As I said, with a plan in place, you can adopt zoning regs, subdivision regs, flood hazard regs. A plan also can help the town in some statewide development review processes. People probably have heard of Act 250. It can also give the town a little bit more voice in certain processes when a company like Green Mountain Power wants to do a project, energy projects or electricity projects. Having a plan also makes it a little bit better or easier if the town is applying for grants that are offered by the state. They usually consider if you have a plan or an approved plan in place, you'll get more points on the grant. Like I said, back in '88, the law was changed. Towns aren't required to have plans, but if they have them, they have to have certain pieces. I'm not going to read this list. You can see it. It has several different components, and as I mentioned, one of the components is housing, but there are also transportation, education, energy, economic development, and so forth. I'm going to shift a little bit to just try to give people a big picture view of the organization chart, essentially, for planning within a Vermont town. Up at the top, you have typically a legislative body, the select board. Now, when a select board adopts regulations, it creates roles for an administrator, a zoning administrator. That's the person who typically is receiving simple permit applications and signing those applications when they can be approved. Underneath the select board is also a function, a legislative function that's fulfilled by the Planning Commission. That is that the Planning Commission helps prepare revisions to the town plan. It helps prepare revisions to the zoning regulations and so forth. As well as having a legislative function underneath the select board, there's a quasi-judicial. It sounds like the judiciary, and that's because the Development Review Board acts in many ways like a mini court. The things that are being discussed tonight don't really have anything to do with the Development Review Board. The Planning Commission isn't the Development Review Board. The Development Review Board isn't the Planning Commission. The Development Review Board's job is when certain applications, certain types of applications are submitted, they are the ones to review it. They also have a different role too when the zoning administrator makes a decision and people don't like it, they can appeal it to the DRB. But this is basically what I've just been saying. Planning Commission prepares the plan, they prepare regulations, they have a role in something called the capital budget. The select board is the body that may edit the work that the Planning Commission has done and then adopt it on a comprehensive plan. They can edit the work that the Planning Commission has done when it proposes zoning regulations and then adopt it. And they can do many, many other things, as you all know if you've been to a select board meeting. But the select board, the legislative body, makes the decision about whether or not to adopt a proposed change to the regulations. And I just touched on the DRB. The DRB does the development reviews. For some people, they may say, but wait, Didn't planning commissions do reviews in the past? Yes. In the past, there was an option towns had where planning commissions did certain reviews and zoning boards did the other, but Shelburne now has a development review board that does all of it. And what it does is that it gives the planning commission more time to work on things like the comprehensive plan and proposals to change regulations. This slide shows a little bit about the different types of meetings that take place, because not all meetings that the Planning Commission takes or is part of are the same. This is a meeting of the Planning Commission. It's not a public hearing. But what happens as a meeting is you discuss business, you decide on policy ideas, but it is not a public hearing like what is required when some proposal is formalized, and you hold the hearing so that people in the community can comment on this proposal before the board decides what to do next. Quasi-judicial hearing, that's the kind of meeting that the Development Review Board holds when an applicant is coming before them, and it's a bit more formal. When the Planning Commission has its meetings, as the Planning Commission, it's subject to the open meeting law. That means there's a notice posted, so when the Planning Commission meets, it posts a notice. The agenda is available. It gets posted in 3 places: here, the library, the post office. It's also posted online. And the purpose of the open meeting law is to give the members of the public access to the decision-making process. Something that happens as well is that minutes are available within 5 days. So when the Planning Commission has a meeting, if someone asks, were there minutes for that meeting? Yes, there are minutes for that meeting, so long as there were a quorum of people in attendance. That is, there have to be at least 4 members of the Planning Commission to serve as the board, otherwise it's not a meeting. When the meetings are held, there are notification requirements, so these meetings don't just occur. There are specific notification requirements. The notification for a regular meeting is at least 48 hours. When there are hearings, there have to be notifications published in the newspaper at least 15 days in advance. And with quasi-judicial hearings like the DRB does, there's its own set of notification requirements. And as I said, decisions made can be appealed. And this is where I pivot a little bit, since I know that some issues of concern have to do with housing. Back in 2004 and 1988, as I said, there were some significant additions to law. So one of the things that is part of the Planning Commission's job is they have to make sure that Shelburne's regulations follow this requirement, and that is there has to be equal treatment of housing types. The town can't discriminate against mobile home parks or multifamily units or accessory apartments or group homes. The state law protects those types of uses, and if the town was to have regulations that said, no, we don't want any of those, then it would be possible for the Attorney General to overturn any decisions made by the town that were based on those regulations. When regulations are changed, there's a report that the Planning Commission prepares and adopts, and part of that report is to make sure that the Planning Commission's proposal isn't going to have a negative effect on the availability of safe and affordable housing. And then I'm going to wrap up pretty soon, and that's by saying that in the municipal plan, it's really a source of information. It's to get at the idea of how much housing is needed in the community and the need for affordable housing, and where that housing should be located, where should the highest density locations be, where in the town should the housing types be, larger buildings potentially with more units in them, and so on. That's pretty much all that I needed to say as far as stage setting. I do have other documents if questions come up and if people want to see it, things that might include the comprehensive plan and the housing section of that and what the vision is. But if you don't have any questions, I'll turn it over to you guys.
Dean, would you please go back to your first slide that had the structure? That one, yeah. I missed.
Just use the mic.
Oh,
so that
I'm
she can hear
sorry.
you.
I missed what you said because I was trying to draw this. What you said about how the DRB, or the Development Review Board, is quasi-judicial. In what way are they?
Well, they're quasi-judicial in that, like I said, when they make their decisions and conduct their business, they're acting like a court. The process that they're doing essentially can affect people's rights. And so in our legal system, when decisions are being made that could affect people's rights, the body making that decision has to give the people who are affected the opportunity to speak and to present evidence. And so the quasi-judicial process is intended to guarantee that there will be fairness. Now, I'll get into the details a little bit by saying that when Shelburne made the decision to establish a development review board several years ago, the resolution creating it had some pieces in it, one of which was to say that the Shelburne Development Review Board would follow a specific type of law called the Municipal Administrative Procedures Act. And the whole point of that law is to make sure that people are treated fairly when they are going to the Development Review Board with an application. So quasi-judicial, it all boils down to the idea that they're like a court. They're not a court exactly, because obviously they're not attorneys, they're not judges, but they function like a court in that they receive an application, they're looking at the regulations, and they're supposed to read the regulations and apply them the way they are written, not make things up and say, we like you, we'll give you a yes, or we don't like you and we'll tell you no. That wouldn't be fair.
Are there hearings, and I also missed this, you may have said it, are there hearings available to the people involved throughout where are people like us
Are you talking about?
allowed to participate or welcome to participate?
Okay, so if we're
Where in that block, or where
Well,
in this
so-
process?
So this is a big picture view to describe these realms, legislative versus quasi-judicial versus administrative. I had gone into some of the specifics about what the different things that the Planning Commission does are, including they write the comprehensive plan, they prepare the amendments, and they prepare amendments to the zoning and subdivision regulations and so on. So anytime I should say, anytime the Planning Commission has a meeting, it's an open meeting. If they're doing their job as the Planning Commission, and as some of you who may be really paying attention to things, there is this very rare occasion that just happens to be going on now where the Planning Commission sits as the Telecommunications Board, and the rules for the Telecommunications Board are more like the DRB. But 99% of the time, the Planning Commission is the Planning Commission, and that means anytime they have a meeting, the public, this is why the commission has this section open to the public to talk about things that aren't on the agenda, because if someone wants to come, as is not uncommon, people will come to the Planning Commission and say, I'm Joe Jones and I live at such and such road and the zoning regulations affect me in this way, and I would like you to consider changing the regulations because I feel they aren't suited to the town. So the public has access to comment, to bring things to the attention. So that's one instance. But the instance I think you're getting at is when the Planning Commission has decided that it wants to change the regulations, it must hold a public hearing. And so that's the formal opportunity for the public to come and say to the Planning Commission, yeah, I saw the notice, I read the proposal, and I really don't think, I'll use an example, I really don't think it should be easier for people to get accessory apartments. Someone could have said that. Or someone could have said, I think it's a great idea. But the public hearing that's held, that must be held, is an opportunity for people to come and talk. Now, it happens at the Planning Commission, and then when the Planning Commission decides what to do, and they move the proposal to the Select Board, if they decide to do that, it repeats. People can, there's a notice, and people can appear, and they can say whatever they would like in front of the Select Board.
Where are the notices? Are they made public through the website? or in the newspaper, or both?
So notifications are published in the newspaper, and that happens at least 15 days before. And they're also posted in 3 places, like I said. They're posted here at the town offices, they're posted in the library, and they're posted at the post office. And they're also on the website. And there's a notice on Front Porch Forum, which people can read and click through and find the material for the meeting.
Always?
Nearly always. I mean, I'm trying to think. It is the intention. There's no legal requirement. Front Porch Forum has turned into a great vehicle for public bodies to get the word out about things, but there's no legal requirement that public bodies use things like Front Porch Forum. I feel it's a good idea, personally and professionally, that's a good idea to make people aware of, because right now, I was looking at their website earlier, there are something like, well, the population of Shelburne is, nearing 8,000, and I think there are close to 4,000 people who are on Front Porch Forum, or 4,000 accounts, or something like that. So it's a substantial number, and it's a good way to reach people, to let them know. And I'm guessing that some of you here tonight probably are here because you saw it on Front Porch Forum.
Yes, so with that, well, thank you all for the interest, and we'll go through it. Any questions you have, and Sean, since you were starting it off, if you wouldn't, no, not at all.
So I'm not really here to talk about zoning because I don't understand the zoning, and I know that Dean will have a whole dissertation on that. I'm here to talk more about the ethical issue of what Champlain Housing Trust is proposing. I do work with Harbor Place, so I'll say that. I did work for Trey Pecor. I will say that also. I don't want the bowling alley to turn into another Sirloin Saloon or another Yankee Doodle. I mean, Sirloin Saloon has sat there forever, doing nothing except they use it as a used car lot a lot of the times. The co-op is brand new this week. It was 1 year old this week, but it has existed next to the Champlain Lanes for 58 years. We're a community of 68 homes, over 100 people, oldest being 95, who's lived there since 1962, youngest being 18 months. I believe the need for affordable housing in Shelburne is enormous. The population of Shelburne, a lot of it is aging, is going to age out. We need to bring families in, and families cannot afford to live in Shelburne with what we have now for housing. We need it. We need housing badly. As for mixed use, I know there's a lot of proponents who want mixed use. I really don't think we need mixed use. I mean, Shelburne just built one, Larkin's property. They're having a horrible time filling their bottom mixed use. They have 3 stores out of maybe 10. I know that we have an architect here, and he could tell me how many units are in there, but they can't rent those out. They can't rent the mixed use. I think we need housing. I think we need affordable housing. I think Champlain Housing Trust's plans were beautiful. I think it should set back from the road. I heard a lot of that on the meeting of December 17th. I thought, oh, it should be right on the sidewalk. I think it's hideous on the sidewalk. We've built one on Palmer and Shelburne Road, and it's right on the sidewalk. Those people living above the carpet manufacturer or the carpet place are right on the sidewalk. It would have been much nicer just to push it back and put the parking in front. I know there's concerns that taxes will go up because of school issues. Taxes are always going to go up. I mean, we built a library. You know, we fought the railroad. We're always going to have taxes going up. You have to bring new people in. We can't just bring in healthy living and not have anybody shopping there. We need to have people live in Shelburne to build the economy. Otherwise, they're going to go live somewhere else, and they're going to go shop somewhere else. They're going to go to Heinsberg. They're going to go to the Richmond. They're going to go to Williston. They're going to go where they can live affordably. My biggest concern with the co-op being right next door is the surface road that services us and Windmill Road and Wild Rose Road. That's the turnaround for fire trucks, school buses, ambulances, fuel trucks. There's nowhere they can turn around unless they went to, I guess, IDX, turned around and came back south. There's no turnaround. They have to use the light and they have to use a surface road. I know there'll be a lot of people here who are concerned with housing in their backyard. I don't know where we put it. Whose backyard are we going to put it in? It's in my backyard and I want it there. I want something there and I don't want an empty lot sitting there like Sirloin Soon and like Yankee Doodle, not Diddle. Yankee Doodle did for, that's hard to say, Yankee Doodle did for a long time. And I'm glad to see that's going to housing. And I think it's going to be a nice project. And thank you for listening. I appreciate it.
Thanks. Anybody else? Sure. Gail?
I just want to add to what was just said, especially in terms of affordable housing. I think it's essential to have some affordable housing here in town. The Champlain Housing Trust is an organization that really helps people to step forward. It's a place for single parents to be able to find a place to settle and to build their equity. It's a place that will provide workers in town, and it's on the bus line, which makes it really easy for people who are on low incomes to be able to work. So, by the way, I'm Gail Albert. I didn't introduce myself. That's my speech.
Thanks. Please.
Hi, I'm Elsa Bosma. I live on Oak Hill Road, and I've been there for about 13 or 14, 15. Oh my God, my son's 17. I've been there for 18 years. Is this a forum where I can ask questions?
Yeah.
Okay, so I have some questions. I'm coming to this very late, and I'm sorry, I haven't done my homework. Are there rules about when buildings are put in about what percentage has to be low income, what percentage has to be affordable housing? How does this work? Or retail space, the number of units, is that something that is addressed here? Is that the DRB?
Within a specific project, no, but there's a overall within the town plan, there is in the housing section, there are, I'm not thinking of numbers off the top of my head, but there are goals to ensure that there is affordable housing available. And there are definitions for what that means.
Shelburne doesn't have what is called inclusionary zoning, which some places like Burlington have, where they say that if you do a project of over a certain number, then a certain percentage of them must be affordable. Shelburne doesn't have that kind of regulation, if that's part of the question.
That is, yeah.
Okay, yeah, Shelburne doesn't have inclusionary zoning, but it does have goals that aspire to have a certain percentage of all of the housing that's built be affordable.
Okay, so there's, just to confirm, there's no rules that say 20% needs to be affordable housing, or you have to have this certain amount of retail space.
Within form-based zoning, there is an idea that I think is getting at what you're talking about, where if you have a multi-story building, that the idea is that these buildings will be seen differently than the way we built in the last several decades, and they'll have stores and restaurants and things on the ground floor and then other things above. And the form-based zoning regulations that have been in effect for a couple of years, they incorporate that idea. So part of the answer to, or one way to answer your question is sometimes yes, if someone wants to do a certain type of building, or if they want to do it in a certain type of place, then if they want to do it, they're supposed to have an active ground floor use. But it doesn't say it must be retail.
Okay.
So there is some room for flexibility about what that would be.
And are there bylaws about the affordable housing, the percentage?
Well, like I was saying earlier, there's
not set in stone.
There's no mandate that says you must do affordable housing. Like I was saying earlier, the law says the town can't say no to someone because it's an affordable housing project that they want to do. They have to treat it as a building with multiple family units in it, regardless of looking at its status.
Regardless of number of units or anything like that?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I'm sure I'll have more questions, but that frames things.
Also, just for a little bit of context, and just for a little bit of context, because you asked the question, we do have traditional zoning that is still in place. Form-based zoning is an optional overlay at this point. And form-based zoning is effectively, there's a list of different building types that can be selected for a given spot, and each building type has characteristics. So when you're looking into it, just to bear that in mind, that currently anyway, we do have 2 sets of zoning that can be used.
And who chooses which of those gets used?
The people coming to propose a project. Like, they could propose under traditional zoning, or they could propose under form-based zoning.
So Champlain Housing Trust can propose which set of zoning laws to use?
Yes, and there's different pros and cons depending on
Okay.
which one. And
But maybe
do you-
just say, so form-based zoning is not allowed throughout the entire.
right, form-based zoning is an
There's only a
overlay
certain-
in the
Certain
Route
areas.
7 corridor, right?
Okay.
Basically, it's the Route 7
Right.
corridor.
And who has the power to say, you must, like, can Champlain Housing Trust choose either of them and they can just go with it and you guys have to look at it regardless of,
Well, and we don't review projects. We look at it from a regulatory perspective.
okay,
So form-based zoning, and not to get too deep into the past, but there was an exercise several years ago where there were consultants brought in and lots of public sessions of people to come in and provide input. And the result of that was a form-based zoning overlay code that was, the goal was to revitalize the Route 7 corridor. So that's a little bit of the history on that, but because of your question, I want to make sure that there was some context around it for when you're looking into it.
But
I appreciate that.
The
Thank you.
thing that causes one person to choose regular zoning or form-based zoning is that form-based zoning allows a greater density, a heavier use, but it also instills, or it causes other things to be more restrictive in terms of where it's located and how close to the street it is. So it's a trade-off, and a developer will choose form-based zoning if they want to get more units, but they have to do certain things in order to have it fall under the form-based zoning. Otherwise, they have to go to the
other.
less dense, regular zoning.
Okay, that makes sense, thank you.
All right, sure. Yes.
Hi,
Hi.
I'm Diana Riley. I'm from Summit Circle. So I've lived up there for 18 years, and I just wanted to mention it's unfortunate this is happening during school vacation week, because I think a lot of families from all over Shelburne would like to be here, but they're on vacation elsewhere. So we're missing some of the voices. I had a question. I came to, I guess it was a zoning meeting, and this is a planning commission meeting. I thought it would be a whole different board of people that I was speaking to, because when you were saying, well, it'll go to planning, I thought that meant something other. So I'm now realizing you're also planning and you're zoning.
Well, no, we're the planning commission that falls under the zoning department,
Okay.
and the DRB also falls under the zoning department.
And the DRB, is that going to be you too, or
well,
that's going to be someone else?
the
Okay,
same
because I'm
staff,
starting to
yeah.
think this is like I'm in a movie or something.
We were the planning commission.
Okay, Good to know. I'm thinking,
But we were the planning.
okay,
The
great.
Development Review Board reviews a specific application whenever that gets filed. And
Okay.
so far, there hasn't been an application filed.
Okay, so this was one place I was confused. I wrote down, where does the question get answered about the Champlain Housing Trust's request of you all to change the regulation regarding only 24 units in their proposal? Does that get decided by the Planning Commission or the DRB, or has that already been decided?
If the rule were to be adjusted, then that would be adjusted by the planning commission, and that would be back to Dean's presentation that that the open to the public, where he said anybody can come in and just say, hey, I'm so-and-so and regulations are impacting me in this way. Would you consider discussing them? And it could be, we talk about it and decide, nope. Or we decide, there's definitely something in there and we're going to put that on a future agenda, and that's where if you're following agendas, you'd see that it was warned. You might want to come in because you're curious about the topic and just see how the conversations go.
Yeah.
Throughout that conversation process, which could be over the course of several meetings, there's no forced timeline or anything. If we decided that there was a rule change that we wanted to make, then we'd have to warn an actual hearing with our proposals, and that would be the public hearing that Dean referenced.
Okay.
And then after that hearing, we'd take additional input, and if we still agreed, yep, this all looks good, we want to forward this, then we would forward it to the select board. They would receive it at their convenience, and then they would schedule a hearing where the public could then again come in and comment.
Okay.
And then wouldn't the public also have, at the time, if that were approved, then application was made to the DRB, the public would then still have an opportunity to voice their concerns,
Right.
comments, or whatever at the DRB,
Yep.
right? So there's really potentially 3 opportunities to voice one's voice.
And if we were to make a change, it wouldn't be just for this specific project.
Correct.
The change would be a regulation change that covers the whole zone.
That whole envelope that you're talking about, that this falls within. Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah.
Okay.
The whole zone or the whole node?
The zone.
The whole
In this
form-based zoning
case,
code.
the request that was initially made in this case was to make an adjustment to the form-based zoning code. Like, there were a couple of things, and one of them happened to be, would you consider increasing density? So that was one of the questions that we haven't even gotten to be able to debate yet, because we're a little sidelined here.
Okay. Well, so I'm hopeful about some kind of a compromise or some kind of, I don't at all like CHT's proposal. Seems like a lot of changing from a plan that we have for a reason. The Shelburne plan has those rules for a reason and prefer to just stick with the plan. I'm actually a fan of the inclusionary zoning that you mentioned before, where it's sort of mixed-use housing, where there's a percentage of low income and moderate income. I know a number of young professionals in Shelburne and South Burlington and Burlington who don't fit into any window of, they make barely too much to be considered low-income housing, but they're also trying to get their lives started. So I don't know if there's a way to make this a portion of it being low-income and a portion being middle-income. For young professionals, that seems to be the big thing, young people running out of Vermont because there's no jobs and no housing that's affordable. A lot of them have too much money, although it's not a lot, but they don't fit into the parameters of what would qualify for low-income housing, and they're trapped and they leave. So just wanted to mention that point. I agreed with this gentleman about the building being pushed back, whatever gets built there. I also don't like the right on the road building idea. And if this were to be completely low-income housing, I didn't quite follow the gentleman's point that we want to bring in taxpayers and people that are going to be shopping at the new Healthy Living, because they will not be shopping at the new Healthy Living. So that, it just doesn't add up. Yeah, Healthy Living is an expensive place. So anyway, that's my thoughts.
Hi, Joyce George. I'm in Summit Circle from Porch Forum Active. CHT serves a purpose. However, it's not important to many of us whether it's CHT or whether it's someone else. What we question is high-density housing that, from what I understand, is in violation of the node, and even more so to the regular zoning, because I believe the regular zoning allows fewer units than the node does.
Then form-based zoning.
Yes. I went to the candidates forum on the 18th, and one of the candidates mentioned we need a marketing plan for Route 7. We can't suddenly just start putting buildings randomly on Route 7. We need a plan. And they also mentioned high-value commercial development on Route 7. You know, something like the proposal for Healthy Living. So I'd like to say, let's stop. Let's do a plan a comprehensive plan that develops Route 7 and not have it look like some of the other towns where there's just random things along Route 7. I watched the May 23rd CHT presentation before the Planning Commission, and it raised the following concerns. In regard to the node, which is form-based planning, CHT stated it is not feasible for them to have a commercial aspect, so they didn't include one. This project should not be allowed to continue when it's in violation of that aspect of form-based planning. We are concerned that the lack of upholding the node sets a precedence that opens the door for high-density residential housing in this corridor. As evidenced in South Burlington, the significant increase in high-density units, if you look behind Shaw's, it's just, as far as you can see, it's high-density housing. And that housing has increased the need for schools, and it's put a huge burden on their schools. And right now, it's all over the newspapers that they want a $209 million bond issue that will actually result in a total cost with interest of $345 million. And that's for the schools. In addition to that, there are double-digit tax increases for the schools and a significant increase for town services. If CHT's plan, which is not in accordance with form-based planning, is approved, it opens the door to more high-density housing. And every member of this commission has to take personal responsibility for the tax increases if that happens in Shelburne like it is in South Burlington. CHT pays taxes, but the issue at hand is the relationship between the amount of taxes paid and the increased burden on our towns and our schools. There was a reason for the restrictions in the form-based planning in our previous zoning, and we respectfully request this commission disapprove the CHT project and hold all developers to the regulations that are in form-based planning or the regular planning, either one of them. CHT stated that because of the way the access road divides the lot, it would not be feasible for two small businesses. After looking at their presentation, there is one large residential building toward the road, which I believe has 24 units, and a smaller residential building toward the rear with 9 units. Instead of apartments, the larger building could certainly house a commercial business, such as a bank or a coffee shop, and the building toward the rear could have residential housing. Having retail establishments brings people to Shelburne. Having high-density housing puts people in Shelburne that go elsewhere to shop, to work. If it were a bank in that large building in the front of this proposed development, people in the neighborhood could walk to the bank instead of hop in the car. And I thought we want to look for areas that residents can walk to versus driving to and getting out of the area. A coffee shop, once again, would allow residents in the neighborhoods to go down and have lunch together. Having a combination of commercial and residential is feasible for that lot, as evidenced by the new construction across from Modern Design. Even though all of us wanted it pushed back farther, they still worked it out. It's still a combination of commercial and residential. Just because the commercial aspect is not feasible for CHT, it doesn't mean that it's not feasible for other developers. And we respectfully request this commission uphold the requirements of the form-based planning and disapprove the CHT project and hold all future developments in the corridor to form-based planning or the regular zoning, either one of the two. After I published something in the Front Porch Forum, oh, one other thing. The node sets forth a limit of 24 residential units, and our previous zoning allowed even fewer units, from what I understand. CHT ignored form-based planning and proposed 33 units, since 24 is not feasible for them. One building with 24 and another one of 9 is a way of getting around our form-based planning. We respectfully request this commission uphold the intent of the form-based planning. CHT has publicly stated this is not an ideal location for housing, since traffic sound is an issue. It's a busy corridor, 40 miles an hour, cars are zooming by. Yet they're proposing high-density residential use. There's an also issue of headlights coming down Martindale that's going to shine right in the front windows of the large building that's facing Route 7. I believe both CHT and the town have a responsibility in regards to quality of life for its residents. We urge you to disapprove this project. I received several emails after my post, and I'd like to share 2 of them with you. Quote, I live in Harrington Village, CHT housing. In addition to them not being concerned about traffic noise, does not surprise me. Yes, I live in affordable housing, but the noise that transfers from one unit to the other is unbelievable because they are not well built. They just don't care because they don't have to live here. The building even shakes when the train goes by. If you were to ask them, and they are honest, their biggest complaints will be noise and how rents get increased every year no matter what. Sorry, one more thing. I have lived here for, and I'm not going to put the number of years in because who knows if they track this person down. I have lived here for X number of years and have lost track to the number of times Shelburne police have been here. They don't care who moves in as long as they pay their rent. Second email. Shelburne already has a lot of affordable housing. Single-family housing, for example, such as Addie Lane, which is Burlington Community Land Trust, McCabe Circle, which is CHT, Senator Drive, Ockert Lane, 20 units, CHT. And there are 3 trailer parks which are not CHT sponsored, yet provide affordable housing to Shelburne. As this gentleman mentioned, the park right beside Champlain Lanes has either 62 or 63 units. I don't know the name of the park that is in the center of Shelburne, but that certainly has a lot of affordable units. And then there is the other trailer park that's up farther. So if you add the number of affordable units in the town of Shelburne, I believe per capita, it is definitely more than Charlotte. It may even approach or be more than even South Burlington. But I think somebody needs to count these because the thought is we don't have affordable housing, but we do. And if we were able to develop more single-family houses under CHT that are affordable, that would be great. It wouldn't put the same number of kids in the school system. It wouldn't put the same burden on the town. Shelburne residents will hold each of you on this commission responsible if you look the other way and do not enforce the requirements of form-based planning. This project, if approved, will set a precedent that will change the character of Shelburne forever. That's a heavy burden on your shoulders. We urge this commission to represent the interests of the residents of Shelburne, not the interests of a developer. We urge you to uphold the requirement of form-based planning and disapprove the plan submitted by CHT. just in case your memory isn't great, I made a copy of this for each of you.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And it's not, when people say not in my backyard is the entire town of Shelburne. I don't want to see high-density housing in Shelburne because I'm concerned it's going to put the same burden on the taxpayers of Shelburne that's occurring in South Burlington. Thank you.
Thanks for your comment. I imagine that there might be some commentary. The first thing that I want to make crystal clear again is we are not approving this project. The Planning Commission does not approve projects, and so the language indicating that we are, I just want to correct the record that we're not approving that project.
My neighbor is not sure who approves.
Yeah.
It is confusing. I do, can I speak?
Well, before, were there any clarifying comments or anything? Especially one thing that stuck out to me was just from a terminology perspective, hearing node and first floor retail and that kind of stuff. I don't know if that's worth
One thing
correcting.
that maybe you would like to have on the record is that the form-based zoning regulations allow 33 units on a parcel that's the size of the bowling alley property. And the form-based zoning regulations allow more than one building on such a parcel. So the representation that CHT would be asking for something special by having two buildings, 124 and 19, is incorrect. 33 units, it could be in two buildings, it could be in three buildings. As long as it's not more than 33, that is possible under form-based zoning. There's nothing exceptional or out of the norm with 33 units on that lot. There's nothing that is circumventing any regulations if they propose 24 units in one building and another 9 in another building. They had asked for the possibility of having 33 in one building, and right now there is a cap. You can't have more than 24 in one building, but that doesn't mean you can't have a second building. And the Planning Commission has not considered changing that rule of maximum of 24 in one building.
Thank you. I wasn't aware of that. I was very misinformed because I was under the understanding that it could only be 24. But it is 33 along with a commercial property on the first floor. Is that correct?
Yeah, as far as we can tell, they're within the regulations as far as the number of units. They were trying to get exemptions for several other aspects that were in not going to the form-based zoning code or the regular code either. But the number of units was okay. That was one thing they got right.
So, other than the exception other than the exception of not having a commercial aspect, what are the other exceptions that they're asking for?
The principal other one was the ability to have the ground floor of the building be at grade. So the form-based zoning specifies that when you enter into a building, you're basically guaranteed to have to step up. And they were asking for a change that would make it possible for the ground floor of a building to be at grade, and that would make accessibility easier. That was the other major request. And I'm looking at Stephen because as an architect, you may be able to elucidate on it, but they wanted flexibility with regard to the elevation of the first floor.
Well, there was also, and I know that you've had talks with them and they've been revising their plan.
I'm aware that they have revised the plan. I don't have a copy of a plan, but I know that they're working on.
So I don't know where it's at right now, but what they showed us before was also the roof shape was, I think, different from what's required by the code. They were talking about a flat roof rather than a pitched roof, among a couple other things they were looking for.
Well, a flat roof in that area and with that building type would be possible. The issue of the roof type would go to whether or not they were seeking waivers, and then in the board's a future proposal to the DRB, if the DRB was being asked to consider to make a waiver, the roof shape might be considered.
And then,
So it's kind of like the safer design to go, but a flat roof building is possible.
so then another thing was they were wanting to push it farther back from the street than the form-based zoning would require.
Yeah, to allow the access road to the neighborhood lot, right?
Yeah, also to get back for sound and to bring it back a little bit further still, I think, than just what would be required for that.
And there are, as far as form-based zoning goes, there are various topics. In previous meetings, we've gone through this, and it's kind of the double-edged sword with front porch forum. Is it's easy to disseminate information, but it's also easy to disseminate things that might not actually align with what's happening. And so in that case, they wanted to be set back a little bit further, and form-based zoning has the concept of the build-to line and the build-to envelope that says where a building needs to be oriented. And the intriguing thing, at least from my perspective, when they came and they had some plans drawn up as an example, and that's what we were using for our discussions. But the fact that for that particular lot, and mostly getting at addressing the concept of a node, for that particular lot, the light from Martindale bisects the frontage of that lot. And so it's a uniquely shaped lot, and based on building envelopes and the idea of having a building closer up to Route 7 that would be split by a light, just complicated things, and that's what sparked a conversation around that. The node concept is that initially with form-based zoning, there were 3 defined nodes, and on the corridor map, they were denoted with the intersections were colored red. There were 3 of them, and one of them was at that Martindale intersection. And this came from the initial form-based zoning discussions, and the takeaway was, and the form-based zoning that got passed then was that there were going to be these 3 nodes. And the idea is that these things develop, it's a 50-year plan, and the idea that there were certain characteristics around a node. One of them was the buildings need to be closer to the road. And then there were other qualities, like I think that was the first for retail use, right? So if the building is going into a node area, it needed to be built closer to the road and have a first floor retail use. So when that project came in, it could have been any project. It could have been just somebody coming in and saying, hey, look at the shape of this lot. There's a light in the middle of it. These things don't make sense. It just happened to be CHT with a project that, again, we don't approve it. If they wanted to propose this, they would go to the DRB, and then that is where this would all get hashed out in terms of, is it a good idea or a bad idea? But it did highlight to us that, wow, well, that's a unique lot, and it didn't make sense to us after our discussion around that should be a node. So that's the only reference to node with that area, but otherwise, it's not a node, or well, it's part of that. Yeah, currently the removal of that is part of the amendment package that is in front of the select board that they deferred to a future meeting to discuss. But there were there were some cleanup changes with form-based code because it had been adopted a few years ago. As with any regulation, there's various little cleanup things. We also wanted to give it a formal spot that was numbered correctly into the current regulations. So this amendment package has those changes in it, but that's the reference to node.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, the regular zoning, does that have fewer units than the 33?
Regular zoning is lower density, which is where, and maybe to take a slight step back, the way that Shelburne is designed in our growth plans is that growth area 1 is the village. That's where growth should be concentrated according to our town plan. The next area is growth area 2, which is effectively the sewer area, which includes the Route 7 corridor. And then you get into the rural area. When we also have commerce and industry, we've got two spots for that, and there's a museum district as well. But the Route 7 corridor is what the form-based zoning applies to, and so that would be an optional path that developers could take. And one of the incentives for that is higher density, but it also comes with additional restrictions. Like you have to have there are certain building types you have to work within. Those building types have characteristics. There are setback requirements that are formally defined. So it's more restrictive, but it does offer some carrots in terms of density, which fits into other parts of our town plan, which have certain gross rates that we're looking to achieve on average year over year. So there are a lot of factors that go into this, but mostly just to clarify for here that we're not approving a project. It was just somebody came in and said, hey, this lot, we would like to do something here. We'd like to use form-based zoning, but this doesn't work for us. And that's what got us onto the conversation of, well, does this make sense in this area?
Oh, okay. So where does it get approved?
The Development Review Board.
The Development Review Board.
Yeah,
Okay.
so if Champlain Housing Trust, if they weren't, for that particular project that people had seen on the previous meetings, if it weren't for the fact that they were just requesting, hey, this is what we'd like to do, but what doesn't currently fit into form-based zoning, would you be open to discussing some of these changes and maybe accommodating this? That's the step where we're at. We haven't really, aside from removing that intersection as a node, we haven't gotten into any discussions around density or anything like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just because the first meeting that they had was like in May or something of last year, I thought this was much farther along.
Yeah.
Than.
I mean, if they were not looking for any changes to the zoning, they would be going straight
Oh, yeah.
to DRB.
It would just go
and make
right
their
through.
application, and that's where you folks would have the opportunity to present your viewpoints and concerns and comments.
Okay. Well, thank you. I stand corrected about the 33 versus the 34.
No, that's why we're here. This is good. It's good discussion.
Good to
Yeah.
clarify.
But in my heart, I'm still worried about the tax implications of high density. And
And those are discussions to have. That's things to ensure that when any project is going through the DRB process, those are good questions to raise. And I can say that at least, I couldn't quote the page or the section, but our plan does have ties to, you want to make sure that the infrastructure is available. You don't want to bring in projects that are going to overwhelm a system. And I believe there have been, like around the Quiniasco project, there have been, or I think it was that one, that there were concerns around sewer capacities and
Yes.
where we're plugging in
Yeah.
and all that. So these things are absolutely, there is a place to bring those things up and make sure that they're addressed, and that's in the review process.
okay. And then there's something published that says when this goes before the DRB?
Yeah, similar to the Planning Commission,
Okay.
it's posted on the website, the town hall, posted here, the post office, the library. Those announcements go out to Frenchport Forum as well.
One additional notice requirement that happens when something goes to the DRB is the abutters, property owners whose land is adjoining, it's next to, they get a piece of paper mailed to them. So the co-op board, as an example, would receive a notification that there will be a hearing on this matter. So you're further away, you won't get one mailed to you, but I'm just letting you know that when things go before the DRB, there is an additional set of people that get things mailed to them directly.
Okay.
I just wanted to address one thing, one concern you had, well, two concerns. You mentioned that it would be good if there was a plan for Route 7 so that there's not haphazard development. The form-based zoning was the Planning Commission's attempt at a plan. And that's, it took many years and a lot of talking to develop this plan, which tried to not just have a bunch of Yankee Doodles all the way down Route 7, because that's what conventional zoning does allow. And the second thing is that the idea of higher density, meaning a greater burden on the facilities like schools, it's tough to say. There's some people that would say higher density means a bigger tax base, and so there's more money to go into those schools. Now, of course, if everyone in those 33 units, if every family had 12 kids, that would, of course, be a huge burden on the schools. But somewhere there's, not everybody is going to have 12 kids, and not everybody's going to have 0 kids going into the school in those projects. So it's not necessarily that a higher density means a bigger burden on the facilities.
And wouldn't that tend to to be with the number of bedrooms. I mean, the more bedrooms you have, I mean, I don't even know how many bedrooms they're having in this unit, but wouldn't it stand to reason that the more bedrooms you have, the more, probably
in
not
that plan,
12
'cause
kids.
I went back and watched one of those meetings after it was referenced on Front Porch Forum as well, and I believe, to address a couple of comments from earlier as well, I believe the CHT rep said that there would be, it was anything from 1 to 3 bedroom units, but that there was also, it was a mix of income levels. Like it was within certain bands. It wasn't just all, because somebody even asked if, well, what is this all going to be Section 8 or something? And it wasn't. It was more a mix and a blend. And I don't know the details, but I think those are things that are important to keep in mind as well with some of the.
I got an email from CHT today, and all of the units there are for people who make, please don't quote me, I think it's under $38,000 a year. So if you make nothing or up to $38,000, then you would qualify to live there.
Yeah, and there are concerns, and other things to keep an eye on is going back to last summer and fall. There were some economic development forums, or there was one formal one that took place, and there were a couple of meetings with the Small Business Association as well. But at the main economic development forum, there were local businesses that said, hey, you know, we've got a business here, we've got a workforce, but our workforce can't afford to live here, so we need affordable housing or we need to move. So these are there's a lot of balancing that needs to happen. And so those are all things that are taken into consideration when the zoning regulations are developed.
That's why I'd love to see a commercial aspect who's going to employ some people who are, who are living there.
Most retail or commerces along the route already need people.
That, you see signs everywhere, so I'm sure there'll be plenty of jobs.
Yeah.
I hope so.
Yeah, but thanks for your
We
input.
came to Shelburne in '67, and we moved here because it was 4,000 people, and, it was a small town. We moved on Juniper Ridge. It was dead end, which was wonderful. The kids played in the street, And then it opened up to Hullcrest, and then it opened up to Martindale, and then Old Orchard went in, and at a time we had a 3-year-old who was totally out of control in the road all the time. So we moved from that development, but stayed in Shelburne because I think Shelburne is a great place. It's a great place to raise a family. It's a great community, and I know change has to happen, but probably because I'm sentimental, I hate to see Shelburne change a great deal and turn into South Burlington.
Well, thanks for your comments.
Trying to keep that from happening.
Hi, I have a little cold, but I'm Ross Moan. I lived in Shelburne for 17 years in 3 different locations, currently on Old Orchard. I'm sorry, Oak Hill. Oak Hill. So I'm concerned about the fact that the removal of the node has moved along so far. I was concerned about it at the last meeting I attended, which was several weeks ago. I think that that's a bad idea to remove the node. I think it's an ideal place for a node. I live on Oak Hill. I work in the old IDX building. I either drive or on good days I walk there, and I walk right through the node. There are 2 somewhat specialized buildings there, the premier gym and the small boat shop. While those are kind of special interest places, I think they're great businesses. I love seeing small boats. I like to use them, so it makes me smile when I go past it. At the IDX building, there's a lot of professionals, young and old, and the Route 7 Deli is one of the top places that people like to go to lunch. There's always a big crowd there at lunch. Blue collar, white collar, no collar. And in addition, there's the, what is the business that's down beyond the bowling alley. No, the residents. So there's always a lot of foot traffic throughout the whole day of workers at the residence who they have staggered breaks because they can't all take a break at the same time. And there's always a lot of foot traffic over to Route 7 Deli. There's the bus stop there. There's a lot of good commerce there, I think. I don't see any reason why we can't have that node there. As to the specialness of that lot, I'm unconvinced. I think that I don't know a lot about curb cuts and how easy it is to change them, but I think that if you put the entrance to that lot a little farther south past the light, people can go in there safely, they can exit safely and make a right turn, and then they would have enough time to get in the left lane and make a U-turn either at Juniper, or if they want to go to the light, they could go down to, I think it's Hemlock. That would also bring people to see some of the great businesses in that strip mall there. That's also a place where there's a lot of really good commerce going on. So I'm concerned that the removal of the node has made it all the way up to the select board now. Has there been a hearing yet for that?
Oh, there was.
Okay. I just missed that, yeah.
Postponed their second one.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
there would be an opportunity to tell them
Okay.
what you thought, yeah.
Yeah.
So just to clarify about the change in the status of the node, it doesn't so much as, it doesn't say that none of those things can't happen. It just doesn't require that they have to happen there. And the reason for that change that seemed compelling to us at the time was the mobile home park, when the code was being developed, again, this is looking out 50 years or so, that was still under private ownership. I mean, nobody knew what was going to happen with that. So we had to kind of imagine a future where it would be possible that that lot, probably along with the Champlain bowling lanes, would be somehow redeveloped in some way. And so that was where, if you looked at it from that perspective, that it's a large area. That really said, and then there's the intersection with Martindale. This probably makes sense as a node. It's near South Burlington. If this large parcel were redeveloped, chances were good that you could have some kind of a more rational connection to the intersection. But then everything changed, and the Pecors, allowed the residents of the mobile home park to purchase it, and so that took that out, and we're just left with this sort of funny, weird lot. And it seemed like a burden on property owners to restrict them to, you have to have something that is going to have commercial on the ground floor if that were not likely to emerge. It didn't say that that couldn't happen if the demand was there. It's just, it was to provide them with some additional flexibility.
Yeah, and I understand that. Again, I don't feel that it's that unique a lot. I think that's something that the developer's trying to push. And I think it would be important to have businesses there. And that's why I would like the node there, so.
The other thing that I think got us to turn that from a node to a non-node was that it seemed that it was too close to the next node, which was, yeah. And so if you make nodes too close to each other, it's like everything is a node. Yeah. And so the purpose of the form-based zoning was so that, or one of them is so that Route 7 wasn't just one monolithic big wall of everything all the same place, that there were undulations and greater densities in some areas. The difference between being a node and not a node is not, as I recall, all that big a difference. It's some relaxing in the setback, but it's not a very big relaxation of the setback. So it's still a closer.
But it no longer requires retail or business on the first floor?
I think it does, doesn't it?
It does, well, It doesn't, that location doesn't require it now, but it doesn't mean it couldn't happen.
Right, but it, yeah.
Is
But
that the
It just
only
seems
node?
like it
Well,
won't happen
no,
unless it
there's-
is.
there's
No,
two.
So we started off with 3 nodes. So one was Martindale, and then the next was down like where the Shelburne Bay Plaza is. So that's the 0.2 of a mile. It's super close. And then the third is down at Longmeadow. It's kind of where what we were hoping would happen is starting to happen with the Shelburne, with the healthy living, and then the Yankee Doodle being redeveloped with some housing, and so that's sort of like starting to cook a little bit, and so that's what we were hoping would happen. But yeah, there's a lot of evidence since the code was adopted in 2016. There's been many changes in the retail industry, and so places are having a really hard time renting out retail space. And so the recommendation is that in order to make it successful, you don't want to dilute the retail, and so you want to be very strategic about where it's going to happen. It's likely to happen. And so again, with the sale of the mobile home park, taking out a really large piece of land that probably had a lot of potential to redevelop with commercial mixed use, with that change in ownership, and then the fact that the other node was only 0.2 of a mile away, it just seemed like, it just made sense to us to change that status in the area right by Martindale. And it doesn't mean that it couldn't happen if demand emerged for it, but it was, just to provide a little more flexibility.
It was still 0.2 of a mile when they made the original plan, though.
Right, but again, in 2016, the assumptions about what could be sustained for retail were different. So I actually presented the plan at the Vermont Development Conference, and that was some of the feedback that we got. Like, you guys, they said, we like this, but you're trying to do too many things in too many places. And that is just not something that is supported by, the, commercial demand right at the moment. So, but anyway, like we said, it's going to be going before the select board for round 2, and that's a time to,
Great. Thank you.
May I ask you when will that be?
March 24th?
Oh, the select board? I don't know when. Oh, is that, it's on the agenda? They've set it? Okay. Looks like March 24th is when they'll take it up, yeah.
So there will be a public notice or?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Well, actually, it's the continuation, so there's no additional publication of a notice. It's a continuation of the hearing.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I was wrong.
And also,
But it's still March 24th.
But the day is still the same.
Yeah.
And if I may, with the node, and really the main thing is the setback's a little closer to the road and first floor active retail use. But also any of the building types that are in form-based code that can fit in that area could happen in that intersection. So it's also think that through a little bit, because I understand that we're talking about that one lot now, but I'm not suggesting any of this might happen, but this is part of the economic development initiative it's worth keeping an eye on these things. The select board is starting to figure out how they're going to pull that together and market the town and wherever that goes. But if that were to be a node, any of the building types that are in form-based zoning that could fit in that spot could be there. So you could end up with buildings that are on each corner of that intersection, on either side and in front of the Champlain lanes. So that's the concept, and not to say that Route 7 Liquors is looking to sell or the Small Boat Exchange is looking to sell, because this is more 50-year out planning was the initial intent behind the form-based zoning.
If I just could clarify something I had said. It is a continuation of the hearing. That just means that it opened on the 11th, and the select board heard input, and they basically said, we're not done yet, and we're going to continue the conversation on March 24. And when I say there won't be a notification, I simply mean that they are not required to publish another formal legal notice in the newspaper, but just as planning commission meetings are their agendas are distributed, the select board's agenda is distributed, and it's not like it won't be shown on the agenda. It will be on the agenda and listed as a continuation of their public hearing. So I just wanted to make it clear. It's not going to be hidden. It'll be out there. It's just there won't be ads purchased from the newspaper.
Eileen? Yeah.
I guess I want to say that the removal of the node was a little bit of a surprise, and I like the idea of commercial being there, and I'll tell you why. I've lived in the community for 26 years. When I first got, my boys were raised on Oak Hill Road, and they love Oak Hill Road. They loved going down to Handy's. My son's favorite restaurant was Sirloin Saloon. That was a fabulous restaurant. You had an entrepreneur that knew what he was doing, had a plan. It appealed to everyone. They came from Burlington, they came from southern, from Addison County. Everybody went to Sirloin Saloon. He was, it served its time, I guess, and it was time to do something new. I also want to say that I don't agree with you that retail is dying. That might have been 3 years ago. I think it's coming back. Look at Shelburne Bay Plaza. I shop at the meat market. I shop at a little something. I am at the dry cleaners down there. I go to the bagel place, and I even go to the tap house occasionally with friends. It's very active. They've cleaned it up. They're doing better. It's very welcoming. I shop at Ethan Allen. I shop at Modern Design. My sons loved going to the Subway place. Oh, I shop at the pet food place. I just don't believe that you need to just lay down and say, oh, well, retail isn't really happening. It's happening in that corridor. And if we get the right retail, it's going to happen even more. I don't understand why you just remove the node of our node on Martindale, and why the other ones weren't considered for moving. Was it the plan that was in your on your table for Champlain Housing Trust? And that kind of initiated you to move the node. I mean, it brought up the conversation about retail, but retail is, I shouldn't say retail, service-oriented businesses that are servicing the community. And there's a huge community in Martindale and Hullcrest, probably your largest community in Shelburne. And we like being served. I use all those businesses down there, and I would be happy to use more if there were more. And I don't like having this requirement taken out of this node because it will encourage more people, developers. It's much easier for a developer to run in and have fewer regulations and build multi-living units, and that's probably what's going to happen. We love the small boat exchange. Shop there too. Prior to that, it was a garden store, and I used to get all my discount plants there. So, and I buy wine occasionally down at the store, the old Handies. And my sons use the bowling alley constantly. So it is a great community. We love where we are, love the distance to Burlington, love the distance to Shelburne. Spend a lot of time, I see Dean out there as well on the Shelburne Bay Path. Dean's running, I'm power walking. But it's a great community. And I guess my point is I'd like to see an effort for retail, and I really think that you should be more forward-thinking about how retail or commercial or service-oriented businesses, I think we should stop saying retail, because maybe the little store that, that sells women's clothing or shoes might not make it, but there are service-oriented businesses that would. So I'm not crazy about this node disappearing or the vote to do that. And I guess I also want to ask you, and I have to put my glasses on for this. I'd like to ask you, because it's not specific enough for me. You did make changes, form-based zoning overlay on November 14th. And it was unanimous, and a unanimous vote, 6-0, motion carried. There was no comment because I believe there wasn't anybody in the audience. I could be wrong about that, but that's what I was told. And I'd like to know what those changes that you're proposing or made or voted to make, what they are. It says regulating plan, building form and lot development standards, public realm standards, landscaping. I don't know. What were the changes that you voted on? Can you be more specific? On November 14th, 6-0, what was it? Because that's what I don't understand. Was it the node that you voted on then? What was the form-based zoning?
That may have been part of it. There were, well, hang on. There were lots and lots of meetings that led up to that hearing. I don't, that's fine. There were lots and lots of meetings and discussions that led up to that hearing where we discussed the final copy that we were then going to forward to the select board. I mean, this took place over lots of meetings. I think we took we took a break of about a year because we had to work on the comprehensive plan. But that amendment package had been worked on for several months prior to when we got into the plan, and then several meetings after that. And then it was put together in a package to say, here's the streamlined version, and that's what's in front of the select board, and the details.
Is this where you voted on the node being taken out? I'm not sure what you voted on.
Oh, I don't know about this particular meeting.
On November 14th, was how does that affect our community? I guess the changes that you voted on to have happen. How does that affect it? Was it the node? I'm sorry, Jason.
What kind of answer are you looking for?
I don't mean to be confusing. I just don't understand.
No, I just...
6-0, you voted on these things, and I have the minutes here, and I don't understand them, and I'm wondering, those votes, the vote that you made that was unanimous, how is that affecting us? How is that affecting the Martindale community in that lot across this street? And I just don't know.
I have a very specific question for you. What kind of answer are you looking for? Because at the end of the day, the regulating plan, the form-based zoning document, that's it. Like, I don't know. I mean,
I guess is that when the node was voted to be taken out?
Yeah, actually, if you wouldn't mind, I think you said you have a timeline thing.
I mean, I have a document that I can project on the screen that shows things. I mean, I think the short answer to the question that Eileen is asking is that the change to the regulating plan, which is referred to, does encompass the removal of that build-to zone. It does encompass it, but it was one of literally hundreds of changes.
But that's how okay. Because I was just wondering, I was looking at these minutes, and I was wondering I didn't understand what was in there, and it didn't say removal of the node, and I just wondered if that was when it was decided upon, when we
There was
made
a whole
the vote.
discussion in front of the select board that outlined
Okay.
what that meant, because they asked questions and stuff as well. And
Okay.
I get it. Before I got involved with the planning commission, I traveled a lot for work, and every now and then I'd see something in the news and loosely had an idea of what was going on in town.
Yeah.
It really wasn't until I got involved that I understood
Right.
more deeply about how things work and
Yeah.
just how the pieces come together. So it's not, nobody's trying to sneak anything by anybody. This is stuff that went on for years. Like this is a long process, and people are welcome.
Talking about removing the node? No.
The node removal itself was probably discussed in a particular meeting, but that went, I mean,
That's more recent because the node was developed 3 years ago when you
Right.
had form-based zoning, so it couldn't have
So
been.
can I just stop you for a second? So the purpose of having the form-based zoning for the Route 7, developing it for, the whole idea of it was because we were concerned for a long time about disinvestment and, the appearance and just the fact that you couldn't tell where South Burlington ended and Shelburne began, and it was also ratty looking, and you had businesses that were trying to make a go of it, and then somebody else would, the business next to it would shutter, and it was not a great situation. And so we wanted to encourage, a lot of the buildings were at the end of their investment cycle, and we wanted to encourage reinvestment in a more comprehensive, thoughtful, attractive way that would help create more placemaking. Exactly the kind of stuff that you were talking about, that you and your neighbors have been talking about. So having a center that you could walk to that would have appealing shops and services, that's exactly what we wanted. We were imagining kids being able to ride their bike to go get a creamy, that kind of stuff, more along the lines of what you have in the village. How do we export that out? So anyway, but when you do this, it is the commercial corridor. It is the largest, the area that produces the most grand list, commercial grand list value in our town, right? So it's important that anything that you propose be something that is going to be supported by the market. And so we passed the optional form-based code, and we were looking at, at some point we'd like to make this the zoning in the corridor because we think it's pretty great, but it was still new, and we weren't seeing quite as much interest in it as we thought, and that's again why I went to the Vermont Development Conference to sort of try it out before a room full of developers, investors, bankers, attorneys, all the folks who are involved in redeveloping an area like Route 7. And that was the feedback I got. I think, that you guys are trying to do too much. There's not the market demand for this. Most of the shops and things are going to end up going to South Burlington. These are the people who actually build the stuff who are telling me this. And that it's not realistic what you're trying to achieve on Route 7. So here is how we recommend, we, developers, investors, people who are going to be coming to your town to do this, this is what we recommend that you consider doing. And at that point, as I said, the P Corps had sold the very large piece of property, and so that was kind of changing the complexion of the area in a way. And
in a good way.
Well, sure, I think so too. 68 folks got to stay permanently in their homes, so that's a great thing. But it meant that was it really realistic that we were going to have kind of large buildings with stores underneath them along that stretch of Route 7? We had just a
understand
a tiny lot. Yeah. So we wanted to kind of create a little bit more flexibility just in that area.
But why just in that area? Why not if you're doing it in our area? Because it does open the gate. It does open the possibility. It makes us a little more vulnerable. If you have it in this tight little node, is it 1 mile? Is the node 1 mile, something like that? It's not that large of a section. By taking out
intersection.
It's just that intersection. It was 2/10 of a mile away from Shelburne Bay Plaza area, which is the other.
So it's only the intersection.
Yeah. It was just.
It's not 2 the line to South Burlington, and it's not, so, but it could be small boat exchange. When the gentleman decides he's tired of doing small boat exchange.
Right, and it doesn't prevent him from building all the way up to the road. If something could redevelop there and build, and go all the way up to the road, yeah,
Okay.
I'm interested
Yeah.
to respond to your
Yeah.
question about what we approved. And I frankly don't remember exactly what we approved. I would have to go back and review the notes
Right.
myself. That's the kind of cat I am, if you will. But what I can tell you is that through the process of developing the changes, it took many years before I was on the commission. I've been on the commission for less than a year. There was another consultant who had come and proposed changes to the form-based zoning to make updates to them, which had never been finalized. I can tell you that when the final document was created, there were so many changes and it was so comprehensive that there wasn't even a red line involved. And for me and for all of us on the board, we literally read through the entire document, meeting after meeting, from one end to the other, going through each and every change and talking through it in detail. There were a lot of changes. Little things, tiny little things. Tiny little things. Should this building type be a foot above grade or 2 feet above grade? And what does that mean? And what does it mean to have a building a foot above grade? What is about the snow? And, you know, all these different sorts of things. Very, very detailed. The node was, I know it seems like a big deal here tonight, but hear me, it was one small part of a much bigger package that was really talked about in great detail. So I want you to know that.
It's a big deal for us that
Get it.
lives, that will be at that light and facing that building and possibly other buildings around us. It's a big deal for us. We want a community-oriented place, and so we're asking you to keep that in mind.
I don't know how the lack of the requirement to do retail at that spot would keep it from being community-oriented, because form-based zoning is requiring anybody who opts for the form-based zoning on any of those lots to really do a major improvement over what's there right now as far as making it community-oriented. And I think with all of this stuff, the market will say whether somebody, you know, can make a viable retail business at that one spot right there or not. But at the same time, by not making it a node anymore, we're not requiring that. We're opening it up to other types of ventures of development. But if they follow form-based zoning, they will be more community-based than what's going on there right now. So it's not. I think I'm hearing that the fact that it's not a node and that it doesn't require ground floor retail space in that one spot is the end of the neighborhood. If people opting for the Champlain housing project, if it follows form-based zoning the way it's written, and it will, unless we make changes to the zone or to the zoning, but it will be a very community-oriented building, I believe. I don't know the design, how it stands right now, but you can't. It's all dependent on what each individual developer and investor wants to do on any of these lots. We can't say, you need an ice cream shop here and you need a coffee shop here.
But you are doing it in other nodes. You are saying they need to do that at the node next to
The retail
other
intersections. There are 2 other intersections
That's right.
that
So you are
qualify as
saying they
nodes.
need to adhere to
Sure.
the regulations.
I would welcome you to bring that argument to the select board. I think we're starting to spin in circles here.
We are. But thank you very much for listening and hearing me out.
Sure. Another question?
Susan McClellan. The proposal, I've been to some of the select board meetings, and Dean always does a great presentation with everything, but I'm still a little confused. The proposal before the select board now is so that all of that overlay district will be form-based zoning?
No.
Is that correct?
No. Form-based zoning was adopted by the town in 2016, and then I believe there was an amendment in 2017. And then this is, again, after all the discussion that we've had and just cleaning some things up, there's another amendment that the Planning Commission passed, sent to the Select Board. And, I think that, they heard it last time and then decided that they wanted to continue their hearing.
Right. And that is for the particular area we're talking about
It
to
has
be
a
only
whole-
form-based zoning?
No. Form-based zoning
So
is still
we'll
an option
still
all
have
over the
two.
way. Yes.
We'll still have the
correct.
regular zoning and the form-based zoning.
Correct.
And it's up to the developer to decide which one is easier for them. Okay.
So we just made
Because,
some updates to the form-based zoning part of the zoning.
Right.
okay, so like the building that we've been talking about earlier that's so close to the road, the, is it Maple Leaf?
Yes.
Okay. So, I mean, that really seems,
Well, and that, just to comment and put some context around that, so with form-based zoning, there are building types. So the developer selected a particular building type that they wanted in that area. And within that, there's a setback range that the building
Okay.
needs to be within. It didn't need to be that close to the road, but for the purposes that they had, they
for
wanted
like
it
the
to be that
parking
close to
lot in the
road.
back or something
Right.
like that, they had to have it.
chose to locate it right there, yeah.
Okay.
I mean, and I think that form-based zoning does generally encourage parking to be
In the back?
but
And
as
that-
far as where
And
how
that's kind
close
of
it
a funny
is.
lot. It's a very shallow lot, so that's probably what drove that decision.
Okay.
I'm just guessing. It's hard to tell with all the snow.
Yeah, and therein lies one of the big problems, I'm afraid. Thank you so much. I
Sure.
appreciate your help.
Yeah.
You've been very generous this evening.
Thanks.
Any other questions? Yeah.
Just a brief comment. In the one other meeting that I attended, I've listened to others on video tape, is it? I don't know, it's not videotape anymore. Digitally. I remember someone saying retail is dead. And I think that a lot of retail it's changed due to the internet. A lot of people order clothing online. A lot of people don't order shoes because I want to be able to try the shoes on. A lot of people do order shoes. But I think service-based industries are alive and well, as evidenced by the Shelburne Bay Plaza. I use every one of those stores, except the tap room. But anyway, it's that place is alive and well.
And that's great, and we're grateful
That's-
for
yeah.
it, and it's the one really, it's been a consistent bright spot in the, Route 7. As a matter of fact, it was one of the things that inspired the form-based code was how could we reproduce that success elsewhere in the corridor? And we studied it to find out, well, what are the sort of secrets of this? And it was the co-location, we think, of the stores in, park once, get out, you can walk and go do a bunch of things. It was the fact that there was an entrance on 2 streets, so it was easy to get in and out of. There were just a bunch of things that were very, that we studied about that to sort of, understand the special sauce that makes that place work and how we could, what were the attributes of that location and that place that we could export and replicate elsewhere in the corridor.
And also just a general comment, I've mentioned the economic development as well. I think the select board set aside some funds for an economic development function in the recent budget. And I know that that's a topic on their plate. The businesses that you're saying that you'd like to see in Shelburne, that's great. I think that's feedback that process as it gets going would love to hear. For that matter, any any of the open properties, Sirloin Saloon or the other ones that have been vacant, a developer could come in and say, hey, I've got this great idea, I want to do it there. They're going to work with the property owner, and they could submit a proposal. Part of the problem is that has not happened as much as we would like. So part of form-based zoning and some of these other discussions are to encourage developers or figure out what will work, because we would rather not have a town with a lot of empty properties. We'd like to have something where we can all have thriving places we can visit. I think that's part of what makes the community. So just something to keep in mind, and I would encourage people to suggest those ideas, or if you have relationships or a good idea for a spot or something like that, to ensure that you bring that to the attention of that process. Do we have any other questions or input or anything? Well, all right. We might have enough time to get to our next topic. Well, yeah, well, thank you all for being here and your input, and yeah. Oh, sure. Got it.
And I just wanted to say the more input that we get from the folks who live in the neighborhoods that surround these parts of Route 7, the better. Our what we will do will be, I think, as a community. So please do be involved and tell us what you think is going well, what you think is not going well, what your suggestions are. It's very helpful to to hear all this. So thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, everybody. Good night. All right, so we are getting late in the game. We do have the PUD buffer issues, and I'd like to think in a perfect world that if we, like, were there any standout things that anybody wanted to bring up around this based on the material in here? Because we've talked about it before. Yeah.
As indicated, you didn't really have the chance to get into it as much as you would have wanted to
the last time.
So it's like,
I just didn't know if there were some key areas that we might want to talk about, if there were any questions, or I know I had, yeah.
And specifically this one particular buffer zone.
Well, there's the one that affects the Automaster lot.
Right.
And in that, there is a bit of a timing consideration, because I think I had the impression that it seemed like it made sense to us. We were just working out some details, and in order for that to go into effect, this process really needs to get going.
What I recall is it seemed like it was relatively easy to make that call for this particular project, but we wanted to make sure we understood the implications for other projects that might want to utilize that change that we're looking at. I think someone brought up, like, if there was a retaining wall that went right up to the roadside, the curb. I don't know if that was that you, Steve? But I can't, and how much ladder, and it looks like Dean's found some really good language and some examples from some other communities. It looks like that addresses those issues.
I think we're in agreement that as long as it provides an environmental benefit, right? Erosions.
No, you're good. Sorry, keep going.
That erosions, is prevented, and, it was all positive, right? Because it's not used space anyway, most of the time, so.
Yeah.
What's the implication of the fences?
That was the one thing that I wanted to get into a bit.
What's the implication of adding fences into?
Because we weren't talking about fences, we were talking about a retaining wall.
we're talking about retaining walls, but I had indicated in the cover memo that this had some relationship to an earlier case where someone had proposed a fence in a PUD buffer. Permit was denied, and then it was appealed, and the denial was upheld, and so it went to court. So
that was in a residential zone.
That was in a residential zone. So one of the issues when we're talking about this is that I understand and I appreciate that we have the Automaster that is faced with this problem, and I know it's easy to do, a single surgical strike and get it done, but there's a conversation to be had about many more things that relate to this issue. So whether or not PUD should be allowed, whether or not fences should be allowed in PUD buffers, or whether or not there should be PUD buffers at all, or whether or not they should be waivable. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that could be discussed that is going to take more time, and probably time that you don't have, that would keep you from making a decision. We're just going to add some flexibility and address that. We're just going to add something that's going to fix the problem that has been pointed out to us by AutoMaster.
Instead of taking a step back.
And instead of taking a step back and taking more time and asking these bigger questions that get to, is the PUD buffer a concept whose time has passed?
Can we do both?
Well, I mean, you can't do it all tonight.
Address the first one tonight. Or,
Well, you could,
and
but-
then take a step back and.
Right, but that, yes.
If would this apply to just PUDs in just the Route 7, the mixed-use district?
Well, this is.
Or all PUDs?
So this packet, the material that was included in your packet, just proposes it in the mixed-use district, because this section 1930.7 is where the PUD requirements for the mixed-use district are found. So
Yeah.
it is only proposing to change that right now. But if you guys tell me, take this idea and replicate it, well, then I'll replicate it, and you'll see it in more districts. But that's still not getting to this larger question of, well, do we even need PUD buffers? Okay, so why do we have PUD buffers?
Right, so I'm a little
Call the
confused
question.
now, right?
So
They're land intensive and they foster car dependency. They're just,
The buffers?
yeah, I think they don't make sense.
Sounds like you're not pro-buffer.
I'm not pro buffer.
Why is that?
Well, because they require arbitrary distances between things that then use up require a ton more land to be used. You got to buffer this and you got to buffer that, and who cares? It's
Kind of
just,
goes against the way that the form-based.
well, exactly, yeah.
Right? If
Well,
you think about
PUD
it.
Yeah,
buffers,
everything has
after
to
our
be
discussions,
separated.
are kind of
Yeah.
antithetical to form-based zoning, and
Yeah.
that's why, form-based zoning, if it was to become the regulations of that district, you wouldn't see PUDs.
But you also have to think in terms of how that makes properties relate to each other. If there are these buffers everywhere, that means you don't have pedestrian or bicycle access, not very easily. Everything has to be accessed by car. You're just promoting use of cars and things like that. So I think they're an outdated
So this is.
technique.
This applies to residential and commercial.
No, just
This is
This
just
proposed,
commercial.
when you say this, you
Well,
mean,
this change or this.
this change right now could be replicated, but it was drafted just for this one area, one type of PUD.
The old idea was that these different uses had to be separated from, everything was the housing had to be separated from the commercial, and the commercial had to be separated from the institutional, and then it morphed into this kind of out of control thing where commercial had to be separated from commercial. So the AutoMaster has to be separated from Danform shoes. Why?
In fairness to the fathers and mothers of the concept, we have to understand that the PUD buffers aren't a requirement by default. It isn't a setback requirement. It is a requirement that comes into play when someone uses the PUD mechanism to do things more intensively. So if someone is just doing standard commercial lot by lot development, there is no buffer requirement. It's when they do a PUD, and I admit, PUDs envision something particular happening, and the AutoMaster is not a good example of that kind of thing. It's just that becoming a PUD suited their purpose because they have so many darn buildings on their property. And that's why they got into the PUD box. It would not apply to them if they hadn't become a PUD because they have so many buildings on their lot.
So they decided to become a PUD?
Well, because they have multiple principal buildings, and you don't have multiple principal buildings except in PUDs under Shelburne's regulations. But then that could force the question, well, why do we have that requirement?
Right,
Yeah,
yeah.
right.
I mean, where do you
Right.
begin? It's just
Yeah.
whack-a-mole, you know, of
It's a little bit of
illogic.
whack-a-mole.
Onion, right? You just
Yeah,
keep peeling
yeah,
and peeling.
it's
But
ridiculous.
maybe
It feels
just,
like for this, then, I mean, I don't want to open up a box of worms, which I feel like I just did, so sorry, let's put it back in the box. I mean, feels like to be, most efficient, we ought to focus on the task at hand here and come back to this other topic with more thought and a more thoughtful,
I think we
considered
should,
approach.
we should address it at,
Well-
a future meeting then.
I have a dumb question. Are there other PUDs in the commercial mixed-use Route 7 corridor other than this one?
yes, oh yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So the Rice Lumber property is being developed as a PUD. The Shelburne Commons is a PUD. So yes, it comes up.
Okay.
That's why everything's so far apart, in a way.
No, not really, but they are PUDs. There are other
Okay.
PUDs.
Right, so, okay, so,
Well,
Yeah.
from previous discussion, the options that had been provided, the first one that you have, the 1931C of just striking the exclude the periphery buffer, which effectively makes the buffer waivable. That is appealing. However, then you get into that slippery slope of, well, does that just mean that it would make it easy for everything to just be waived, and it'd be hard to argue against doing that. I think that was the tricky part, and why that would probably be the easiest thing, but yet also could end up being controversial. Which is where the second option of 1937C of adding retaining walls to the list of features allowed in the buffer and have context around that.
I did you a disservice by not including in the cover memo a reference to the discussion that had taken place, which convinced me basically that you're going down the same path that you were talking about going down before, and this document was distributed before, and I might have just left it out because I don't want to suggest that you wanted to, derail your efforts having to do with the AutoMaster by considering big picture things first. It seemed like it was a good idea when you first discussed it, but I did think that you guys were all of you were thinking along what was included in the actual red line version, and that you were going to either just limit it to the mixed use PUD 1930.7, or possibly say, oh yeah, we really like this idea so much we think that it should be tried out in the village districts as well, but then just leave it at that. Or that's where I kind of thought the discussion might go, not to whether or not you would seriously consider tonight whether you would drop PUD buffers entirely.
Can I just ask one more? I totally agree with that we shouldn't get bogged down on the big picture. If there's this one issue we can resolve quickly. But to ask, like, the bigger picture thing on the PUD buffer, which this page X1, X11, I guess it is, or whatever, it's not 11. The setbacks and dimensional requirements, where it says what the buffer is, C4, it's 50 feet, but then C5 says minimum side yards and rear yards where the PUD abuts non-residential property shall be 20 feet. Does that mean that the buffer goes down to 20 feet if a non-residential abuts a non-residential?
Yes.
Okay, so the buffer then becomes
Smaller.
20 feet.
Yeah,
Or-
so there's already been some work done on this over the years, and that was one of the results of that, where the PUD buffer there wasn't this subtlety before, I don't remember what year, but yes, you're reading it correctly.
Okay. So 20 feet, that's pretty good. I can see how it would be 50 feet.
Right.
Maybe if it's a
And then-
AutoMaster next to my house or something like that.
And the other important thing is that there's a front buffer, and then there's the side and the rear, and you've just pointed out that it was the side and rear that drops to 20 when it isn't intervening, and I think their PUD buffer, where they're proposing this, is actually the front one.
Right. And it's the back of the other one.
Well, it's back up against the, yes. that other commercial
But
property.
if it's the side of the other one, then
Yeah,
it would
the-
have 20 feet, the other side would have.
because that's relative to the plane of Route 7.
The
Even though it's
access point.
nowhere near on Route 7.
Right, yeah.
I mean, more illogic,
But it's
yeah.
their address, right, Route 7.
More spatial illogic.
Yeah, that
So
seems like a side to me.
Yeah.
If it's not the front,
But
on
I
the
think
front
it's logical,
of the
if we
road.
discuss these things and we start biting into it to see what else there is, is it part of our, to make something logical, once you start looking into something, there's a bigger step to take at some point down the line.
Yeah, and we're
Then we
starting
should
with
take it.
something that's not logical
Mhm.
and trying to make it less illogical, which is, yeah, can that even be done,
I just have a question. The idea of a buffer has come up in some of our natural resource issues where people wanted fences, and fences were not really structures and everything. But my concern in looking at this is one thing as opposed to looking at it as a global change, is that it begins to look like spot zoning, and it seems to set a precedent that says anybody can come in and ask for a change in something that's already zoned, and I think that's worth thinking about.
Certainly a consideration. I mean, and that ties into something that Dean, you and I have spoken about, is even if right now tonight we said, hey, you know what, this red line, great, let's tweak it and we'll warn a hearing and move forward, then it's almost like we're peppering the select board with one-offs here and there. And it's almost like, from anybody familiar with the software industry, like come up with a release schedule where we'd say, once a quarter, twice a year, whatever it is any changes that we have would go into a bundle that then goes to the select board. The argument against that, though, could be that the bundle passes or it doesn't. Or do you keep them all separate, but they're sent all at once, and they can be evaluated separately?
And you could also say there's the issue of being responsive to a community member.
There is, but at the same time, they came to us with a legitimate issue that they're having on their land that realistically doesn't impact anybody, and I mean, except them. And it is a legitimate complaint, and I think it's also our responsibility to be responsive to constituents. I mean, if this was somebody saying, like a resident coming in and saying, I don't like that business there, well, okay, there's not much we can do about it. It exists. Even in this case, there was a project that came in and was requesting tweaks to the code, and people came in, and that's giving us a lot to think about, and that will inform our discussion. But in the case of the autumn master requests, I don't know. It's almost like Brian Precor's question about the sidewalks that he's bound to do under form-based zoning, and got caught up in that whole thing. We don't have the ability to move very fast around those things. But if we had a good solution, that's something that we would want to get past, get to the select board so that that engine can go, so that
Yeah, I guess my
they can
only
do that in
point
the spring.
was, doing it like a software release where you put a bunch of fixes into one release, it's probably the more efficient way to do it. It's not necessarily the most responsive way to do it.
Right.
It's efficient for the select board, but it's
Right.
not necessarily responsive
Exactly.
to constituents.
That's all I was trying to say.
And business
Right.
owners.
Right.
I mean, this
Exactly.
is the commercial corridor,
Right.
so,
Right.
and we are trying to encourage.
But if I understand this correctly, you could build a path or a sidewalk in that buffer zone right now. But not a restraining wall, which actually serves a purpose for
Right.
preventing.
So this
Water.
would be a good thing to enable. And just a last comment on that, it's something that we had spoken about, but just hearing you say that made me think we could pass stuff to the select board regularly, keep it in a spreadsheet or something, and they can decide to process them all at once or piecemeal or whatever. That can be a decision that they make. I mean, if we collected them for them, that would make their life easier, but effectively they could decide to sit on something for 6 months if they wanted to.
I like the, and move it on when it's ready, move it
Like,
up.
and I
move it
don't
up.
think we'd want to be egregious with it and just every meeting be doing that, but yeah.
I'm very much of two minds of this. In my previous work on planning commissions and development review boards, it was a much more methodical process that was not, we weren't making changes based on the input of one person like what happens here. And it makes me, in some ways, uncomfortable. To your point, it feels like, oh, we're just being responsive to an individual property owner when we're supposed to be looking at the entire town. And why are we on some levels, it does feel like we get all wrapped around the axle trying to solve the problem of one property owner or potential property owner in the case of the bowling lanes. Now, I also see the benefit of being responsive, and I've heard you articulate, boy, the Planning Commission really is being responsive, and I don't know why people are calling us not responsive, because look at everything we're doing. And I think that's an awesome position to be in. So I'm very much I feel the push-pull in this. But hold on. But I'm also sensitive to folks that we hear here tonight who are like, how are we supposed to keep track of this stuff? You know, look at all these hearings that are going on. When was this happen? When did that happen? When did that happen? And, you know, perhaps if it was something that was on a 6-month schedule or something, would be like, this is the time in 6 months that we're going to make some changes, and now's the time to, you know, and we could actually be more proactive in getting people to pay attention to those things instead of being like, now we're doing this, now we're doing this thing, you know, and all of a sudden Danform comes out of the, what the hell did this happen? You know, so anyways, there's just some comments about it, and to acknowledge that your point, and I feel both ways.
Yeah,
It's
and
tough, yeah.
I think that's the tightrope that we walk, right? Is I agree. I think it is great that we are responsive, that it's a living, breathing, and that we respond. And I think the tightrope that we walk, or that I feel that I walk, is that we want to make sure that we don't make decisions or recommendations based upon one specific situation. It's like we're talking about it is to me, this one makes sense for not just this. So for me, this AutoMaster situation is like the catalyst for something that's like, that makes sense. You know, a restraining wall that prevents erosion, better water management, you know, that it makes sense for the AutoMaster, but doesn't that make sense for anybody that's in the PUD in that buffer zone if they have a similar issue? That isn't that a more responsible way to deal with you know, the issue that they're talking about, whether it's them or anyone?
And it's not a bad way of things evolving, you know, that
I don't know.
I mean, if you would have asked for a swimming pool, I don't think we would be here discussing that. But, you know,
Right.
so there's, and it takes one person to bring it up, and, you know, kudos to them to bring it up and says, we've got a problem. And, you know, then you think about it, and that's how things evolve. And
That is, in this particular case, and why I had a question about fences as well, because as far as the proposed changes were, if effectively, if your paths and sidewalks are already allowed, and then if we added, well, it says potentially fences, but then add retaining walls, that is a reasonable use, and this would be something it says with the approval of the DRB, and we have to trust that the DRB would weigh the evidence accordingly. I mean, they might be stacked and have different views and go a different direction, but I think we have to trust in the overall process. But fences, though, got a little sticky because of the previous instance, and I don't know.
I don't know the history, so.
I suddenly get a little harried about just, you know, we're talking about a split rail fence or a stockade fence or chain link fence. Like, what kind of fences we do? So is there definitions? And I mean,
what if you put up a path or a sidewalk, and then you decide to put up a fence? You could do both, right?
Well, an individual's not normally, I mean, when you say,
No,
when you decide.
Well, let's use this case. If AutoMaster wants to put a sidewalk there, they put a sidewalk. They can.
Sidewalk.
But then they decide to put if we say, okay with the fences, they decide to put up a fence. Like, they could put the fence so that the people at Danform can't use that sidewalk anymore, right?
Well, but it's not a public sidewalk.
Right? No, I agree, I agree.
Right.
But if they do that 10 years apart, right, then all of a sudden you don't have your sidewalk. So I think a fence is a bit more divisive, personally, but that's than a retaining wall or a path, or because most of these things are kind of inclusive or kind of beneficial.
But a person who wants the split rail fence or some little modest fence who gets a who gets told, sorry, it's a fence and you can't do that?
I think if you could build a retaining wall.
instead.
Yeah, that's right.
But he could build, if he could build a retaining wall within the buffer, he would, outside the buffer.
Allowing fences and retaining walls, anything, you can have it as long as it's less than 4 feet. That's very modest.
I kind of like that.
But it could be very functional in terms of addressing, creating an area that makes it a little bit more functional to address a stormwater problem. It's de minimis
Because
impact.
that can't be, 'cause if your buffer is 50 feet, and you want to build a retaining wall at 20 feet, you have to build it there, right? You can't build it at your start of the buffer. Or you can build a fence there if you want, right? Either side can build a fence at, 100 feet apart, I think, right? And they can have 2 fences. They can do that legally right now. It's on their property.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
guess.
But the retaining wall is in the no man's land, so they have, that has a benefit, that you can't say, well, I'm gonna build a wall here, but that the need is over there, right, in the buffer zone. So that's why you need it there. Whereas the fence, you can move anywhere you
You're
want.
saying that there's greater flexibility about the location of a
Yeah.
fence.
I mean, a retaining wall serves a specific purpose in their case, to prevent puddling and freezing over and locking cars in place and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But if you want to build a fence, you can still build it on your property.
You're like a rock and roller.
Before the buffer, that's what I mean.
Does that not come
Yeah,
out?
but you'd have to be 50 feet away. So it seems like we ought to include fences now in this rewrite as something we allow, because if my property is here, and the fence, I have to put 50 feet away from the property line, because it has to stay out of the buffer, then who maintains this 50 feet that's outside the fence?
Still yours, it's still yours.
Yeah, I know. Well, so you have to maintain it somewhat.
Still
You
yours.
let it overgrow. You're not going to mow it. You're not going to landscape it because it's the other side of the fence, even if it's yours. I would say that we should, if we're allowing retaining walls in this buffer zone, we should allow the fence to be at the perimeter of the property rather than 50 feet in from the perimeter of the property. Because we don't want
Who would ever do
stuff to
that?
be
Who
accumulating
would ever
garbage or
choose to do
something.
that? No one.
Suddenly, everybody's is gonna want to put a retaining wall, right? Because nobody's gonna want to put a retaining wall just for the sake of it, right? They have to have a need for it, right? So,
It's an expensive
yeah, it's an
thing, yeah.
expensive thing, engineering and,
Yeah.
wastewater and all that stuff. So I'm sure.
Can you speak in the regulations to the construction being purposeful as opposed to whimsical? Because we were just talking about a property that wants to develop something, and we were concerned about the buffer being a place where people are going to, this was in a residential place, where people were going to put a playground or something. What's the purpose of the buffer? And maybe defining the purpose of the buffer would help define.
Buffer is defined in the regs already. So,
The why of the buffer, I guess.
Yeah.
You're getting at, Gail.
Right.
And that's what I'm unclear about. Why is there the buffer?
Right. Bingo. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, if you're trying to,
All right, Sean, why is it in the regs?
if you're trying to preserve openness, then that's one thing. But if you're just trying to create space for no particular purpose, that's something different. But if it's a sensitive area like what's happening at Automaster, then it makes sense to be able to allow it. So is there a way within the regs to define the purpose that way?
So, I mean, Shelburne years ago had a different vision for the Route 7 corridor, and part of that vision was to set commercial uses back. And I know that there are all kinds of arguments against it, but the idea, the vision was to set commercial uses back, to limit the number of places that you had roads passing through a wide green strip. So as you drove along Route 7, the thing that was immediately adjacent to the road was a green strip, and beyond that, you would see the parking lot and the commercial use. And this larger front yard perimeter buffer, periphery buffer, is consistent with that idea. It was the part of the vision for a green band alongside the road before you saw the commercial. It was, the setbacks were pushing everything way back. It was the exact opposite of what we have now.
Yeah,
It pushed everything back.
I'm not questioning that. I'm just sort of saying, is there a way that we can define the purpose within this so that it's easier for the DRB to decide if a request for some kind of exception is reasonable?
Yeah, I would agree with that. And
Well, there was
it
one
does sound
option
like
here that said
the
like
buffer is an
for
outmoded
stormwater.
thing.
Well, it seems like it based upon, form-based zoning and the way we're going now, it seems like a time has come and gone.
At least for the Route 7
this,
corridor,
for this.
anyway.
Right.
Now, is this what we're changing any kind of PUD buffer zones, even in a rural district?
This is only affecting the mixed-use district.
Okay,
Which is Route 7.
Yes.
yep, all right.
But you said it'd be easy to.
It could if people want to run with this idea, but I don't know if you do.
But we don't know what the other one, I think the implications of the other ones are a bit more, I think Route 7 is a lot more visible, in this case it's very visible because we all kind of can visualize it.
You have fewer commercial PUDs in the village, as an example. You have them up on Route 7 in this mixed-use district.
I think this would be a good way to start, and then we could look into, the question of how to do that elsewhere another time, because there still are some valid needs for, I hate to use the word buffer, but a separation between a residential area and a commercial area. So, I see this more as a refinement rather than, chucking everything out. And we could do some more
But you're not
research
talking
onto
about
PUDs.
residential to commercial, you're just talking about industrial, commercial.
Well, so we're just now talking about adding to the list of things that are already allowed in buffers, fences possibly, and retaining walls. That's what I'm understanding. It's
It's a
commercial mixed.
but only when you're talking about something that is a commercial PUD.
But just to be real clear, that could be adjacent to a residential property.
Could be,
zone. Right. I don't think that's a barrier, just being clear.
Or you could make an exception, or you could make a rule that says when the one side that abuts to the residential, then it's still 50 feet.
Yeah.
And actually having a retaining wall.
And keep those.
In a buffer area, in a commercial that is abutting a residential area, can actually enhance the quality of the buffer for the residential, because it would allow for perhaps more intensive planting above it or something like that. There are many examples of that. And also, just use of earth can have a buffering effect on things like noise and stuff like that too.
So just hearing this discussion is, fences still seems like a bit of a question mark, but is otherwise the red line there with those suggestions?
Yep.
Yeah,
I'm good with that. Other than fences, I'm not sure why fences would have to be included.
Yeah, we need to know the height.
I'd like to have fences included.
Yeah?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, me too.
Well, because it's still with the approval of the DRB, and again, we would need to trust their judgment, because we're considering this with one specific scenario in mind, but also trying to consider that there are other scenarios, and that's why we have a DRB.
Play a little devil's advocate to the 4 feet. If you are looking at DRB approval, do you need to put in a height limit?
So you mean you don't have a beautiful wall 30 feet high?
Well, but that would be the DRB's decision, right? I mean, I just, I'm a banker, right? So very detailed, right?
Sure,
So 4
yeah.
feet, part of me is like, Yeah, I know the first one's gonna be 4 feet 2 inches.
Right,
Right,
of
you know
course.
that. You know that's gonna happen, right? So
Because the base is 6
well,
inches,
no,
right?
or it's 5 feet, or 5, you know, so that's,
Tends to happen.
you know, right? So that's my only,
Even if you say 4 feet, then at least you're not gonna get 15 feet as the first thing that somebody's
so
gonna
then
wanna try
maybe
to.
this is a point of clarification for me, that if we put 4 feet in, does the DRB, are they limited to 4 feet then? So they can't do a waiver or over, right? So if someone came in and said, I want a 5-foot wall, a 5-foot fence.
Well, they can do a series. I mean, this is the thing. That the way this other language works is that it would not be one single wall, but it could end up being.
No, I'm talking the
series.
fence. Let's just say just
Oh,
a fence,
okay.
right?
But I
So
think
they
the
want,
wall
they want a
would be this-
5-foot fence.
Well,
But
in
the
this
wall-
definition, fence doesn't have a height on it.
But the
there's
wall
no-
would be
Yeah.
necessity to the purpose though, right?
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, that's my misunderstanding. I'm sorry.
But that does
Good point.
raise the question
Good
of, should
point.
there be a height to the fence?
Oh, I thought that's what you meant. I like the idea of a, but then you get into.
No.
But
No,
should you be
I'd say
able
no.
to see through the fence?
I'm good
Or-
with Kate on the 4 feet on the retaining
Kate-
wall.
Kate-
I thought it was fence and retaining wall, sorry. Go ahead, Neil.
I thought Kate proposed 4 foot for both fences and
I thought so too.
I did, just because I thought that a 4-foot fence, you see that commonly, you know, on
But then you have to see what kind of
neighborhood
fence.
street, you
And
know?
you have to see through the fence and not an opaque fence.
Is this was an idea of what number would go into a document that would be prepared so that you want it for public hearing, and then you could decide whether or not at that hearing, whether you tweak the number?
I think that's fair. Yeah, and really where I was.
That is.
It is, and what I was trying to gauge with the conversation, and it sounds like we're there, is I think we are in a position to at least move forward to be able to warn a hearing. There might be some fine tuning, but I think we're in an agreement that,
Agreed.
Are we all in agreement? I mean,
Well-
with the fence, are we, or?
You can't warn a hearing now because we don't have the report, but you could,
Right,
you could tee
but
things up so that
to-
knock on
yes.
wood, everything is together at your next meeting, and that meeting you could.
right,
Let's do that.
yeah,
Yeah,
done. All right. Yeah, so we'll work on that.
And put on our to-do list to remove buffer zones.
Yeah,
Well,
that would be it.
Your to-do list,
Our to-do list is getting out of
so
control.
big.
Just for process,
like
just
I'm
out
at
of
work.
curiosity, so the question with the fence, if, there's, we put it on if there's a majority of this group, is that how, normally that works, right?
Yeah,
Right,
as long as there's a quorum
Yeah.
voting.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay,
yeah.
that's fair.
And then the only other comment I had is that the next page, you had the 1980.10 retaining walls definitions. I think A was intended to be accept.
I'm sorry, A was what?
The first word
Yeah,
next
it should
to A
be
was intended to be accept.
Oh, yeah.
But then, what was it? I think aside from that, A and B were good.
Damn spell check.
C, I was wondering if after the comma with the exception that portions of such walls which measure 4 feet in height or less than 4 feet shall not be subject to this requirement. I was just wondering if that part of that sentence was relevant.
Oh, yeah, if you have a 4 foot or less wall, then you can put it within 10 feet of the property line, right?
That's what you're talking about, C?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, so
So-
C is just if there's let's say you have a retaining wall and it varies in height because it's on a slope or something like that. So the portion that is less, 4 feet or less
Oh,
can
I
be
gotcha.
within
Within
10
10
feet.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it has to sort of arc away or
Yep.
do
I
something else
gotcha.
or stagger away or something,
Okay.
yeah.
So totally good with that. In D, in talking about, let's see, it has 0 to 2 feet from a property line and then 2 feet or more from a property line. So it should either be 0 to 2 feet or greater than 2 feet.
Yeah, I had the same note. Retaining walls,
Yes.
2 feet or more from property line should be changed to retaining walls more than 2 feet from a property line.
Right.
This was how it was drafted in that other community. I remember kind of crossing my eyes on it.
Oh, yeah, this is not a criticism of
No, I'm just remember thinking, they had a lawyer on
Because
that.
I think it's
The way
good to
written, it
have,
gives you options either way.
Right.
For 2 feet. And it's one of those less than or equal to, you know?
To go back to A, is this saying that we'd be allowing heights of walls that are 12 feet high in one go?
Where does the 12 feet come from?
That was, I believe, from the community that this
community?
came
Is that the one
from.
in Massachusetts?
So
right?
you're asking Stephen again,
Needham, wasn't it Needham?
what about the 12-foot limit?
Is that saying that somebody can put up a 12-foot high fence, or wall, rather?
Retaining wall.
It would
Retaining wall?
say that you're not going to have walls greater than 12 feet. No retaining wall shall exceed 12 feet in height at any point.
So
That's the
if-
max.
That's a
we had sort
pretty
of said
high
in-
retaining wall.
In C, in setbacks and dimensional requirements, we had talked about a 4-foot height.
Yeah.
So this is why the question was, what's the limit on height that you
well, it's
want?
also average.
And so if this is a definition, then the townwide definition of retaining wall is no bigger than
Well,
12 feet.
the definition
with
is only at
regards
the
to-
bottom. The stuff that you're talking about, 1980.10, would be a new section. It's not the definition. The definition is just down at the bottom of the page. So 1980.10 would be a new set of
Right.
requirements that anybody, if someone's got a project and it involves retaining walls, it's not a PUD. This is stuff that would come into play. So it would be applicable to retaining walls. That's the essence of it.
Okay.
In terms
So,
of the mixed-use PUD stuff, that's all about C, 4 feet in previous village.
Yeah, the stuff that is in this section 1980.10 would come into play if you chose to use that last sentence that's at the end of 4, where it says, hey, retaining walls allowed in the buffer shall also comply with the requirements of section. So that's where you get into this
Okay.
idea of restricting someone's ability to do kind of creative end arounds.
So this 1980.10 is any retaining wall,
Yes, that would be, that's
not necessarily in a buffer zone.
not exclusively to buffers,
Got
yes.
And so in 1980-10A, except where further restricted, and
Yeah.
it's further
Which, that's for the
restricted
buffer.
That could be in the buffer, right.
over here.
There you
than
go.
4 feet.
Okay,
how about we say in
okay.
number 4, we say 4 feet for path, sidewalks, fences, and retaining walls with an average height less than 4 feet shall be allowed in the periphery buffer. And then on the next page for retaining walls, 1980.10, we use 12 feet also for the retaining wall in A, and then they're allowed to terrace as in B and C, where it's, you go over 4 feet, and you can go down 4 feet, over, down, or likewise. I like the idea of retaining walls not being greater than 4 feet, because then a person can climb up that and get over to the next thing. It's not like,
It's human scale.
it's human scale. A 12-foot wall says, keep out, you're out of here, you don't belong here.
And they can also fail, too. They have a greater chance of failing, too.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I know that in our licensing, that's the height at which you have to get an engineer, has to be okayed by an engineer.
Okay.
Yeah. It's like this threshold, 12 feet, I don't know why, but it just is.
So that 4 feet seems to make sense, and then it would encourage planting, and
Yeah.
so the wall at the old Kmart Plaza that's 12 feet or whatever that they just put up, if they had to terrace that, they would surely lose some parking, of course, but
Would be
but they
prettier.
could, it'd be prettier. They would put landscaping on each level, even if they just let it grow.
And that's the difference
to
between
weeds.
Shelburne and South Burlington.
But to be honest, anything's better than the old parking lot that they had at Kmart. Anything's better than that. So.
True story.
How does the 4 feet sound to everybody?
That used to be on my shortcut.
I think it would be a
I think it sounds good.
placeholder, and you can change
Yeah, I
it
think
if you
good
wanted to.
placeholder, and then this would be good.
Is this general definition just for the commercial area?
No, it would be
It's just-
it would be in the definition section.
So how would that apply to a retaining wall on the lake where they might need one that was higher than 12 feet?
Well, the definition doesn't define. Oh,
So to make it
Oh,
clear,
I see what you're
it
saying.
would be great and a very good idea to say does not include, and the term in the regs is lakeshore erosion control structure. So there would be no confusion between the two. So if it is a lakeshore erosion control structure, it's not one of these.
Yeah. Good point.
Very good point.
Good
Is
catch,
that
Gail.
managed by the state directly? That lake erosion, or is that the town?
No, we're talking about lakeshore seawalls, basically, that are a local thing.
Oh, are they?
So then, given the time, are we good with just pushing? We'll find an agenda to get this on. Is there any other business from anybody?
I would move to adjourn.
I would second.
Well, moved by Neil, seconded by Steve. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you all.
You did it again. You
Thank
got out
you.
earlier than